In order to get us ready for our final exam, I wanted to walk through this practice problem that you will complete on your final exam. There'll be two versions of this on your final, and your homework this chapter will require you to complete two of these and submit those to get you ready for that. In order to start this, I want to make sure that we walk through what we've got here and what all of these following information is listed there, what it all means. Okay, so the first thing we have is the total project cost of $30 million. So what we're saying with that is we're going to build our limited service hotel, and it's going to cost us a total of $30 million to complete the project. We've approached the bank, and the bank has said, okay, we're comfortable with this project. We're going to lend you some money. We will loan that to you at 7.5%. That is the interest rate that's listed there. The next thing, the amortization rate, or the number of years that they're willing to give you to repay this loan, is 20 years. So that's the next item that's listed. But then they want to have what's called a debt service coverage ratio. So you can't pledge every dollar that you're taking in income in the business to pay the loan. The bank's uncomfortable with that if there's a hiccup, like we're seeing currently with the coronavirus in our business. That's a problem. So they want a debt service coverage ratio of 1.5. That means your cash flow needs to be 1.5 times your note payment. We'll see an example of that in a little bit. Then the next one they have here is the debt to cost ratio. And that is the percentage of the project cost that they are willing to fund. So in this case, it shows that they're going to fund 60% of this project cost. The next thing we have there is the projected annual cash flow of the project. That's saying on an annualized basis, how much cash are we generating? Now we're going to do one like this and one where you're going to have irregular cash flow amounts, which is more like what it would be in the real world, but this is a good practice problem to have just a set cash flow. So as we saw in the above listing, the bank is only going to fund 60% of this project. So that means we have to raise the other 40% as equity. So the hurdle rate that the equity investors are giving us on this project is 15%. So they want at least a 15% return. Our tax rate on this project is anticipated to be 35%. And then our cap rate, as you see the bottom one listed there, the bottom bullet says we're going to sell this in year 10. So our plan is to get this hotel built, operate it for 10 years, and then put it up for sale. And in order to do that, we're going to have to figure out what is our estimated selling price. That is the cap rate there of 10%. All right, so what I want to do now is walk through each of these individual items below and look at how do we calculate these answers. Okay, so the first one that we have is we're going to calculate the maximum amount of money you can borrow based on the lender's debt to cost ratio. Okay, so that means you're going to take your total project cost, in this case $30 million, and you're going to multiply that by the 60%, the debt to cost ratio, the percentage that the bank is willing to fund in the loan. So you multiply those two numbers, that gives you $18 million. So what we have learned here is that the bank is now willing to say that they're going to give us $18 million to fund this project. All right. So with that, we can then go ahead and calculate the answer that we have in number 2. Okay. So we're going to calculate, or the question we have in number 2, calculate the amount of annual debt service based on the loan terms that were offered. Okay. So in question 1, we just calculated the loan amount. That's how much the bank is willing to loan us, is the $18 million. That will become our present value. Please remember that goes in as a negative number. Then it gives us the year from the info given above, right? It says that they're going to loan us this money for 20 years. Even though we have a sale in year 10, we're always going to use the longer time from the bank. So we're going to use an N of 20. Then the interest rate from above, which is the loan amount, the interest rate that the bank is willing to give us is 7.5%. That will be our IY. And then as we've learned to do, we're going to go ahead and calculate that, and that's going to compute our payment of 1,765,659. All right, so that is the answer to number 2. All right, then we move down to number 3. So we mentioned earlier that the debt service coverage ratio is how many times over your bank note or the money you owe the bank on an annualized basis is your cash flow going to be. Very important number to the bank. So here, number 3 says confirm that the debt service coverage ratio required by the lender is met. So how you do that is you take the projected cash flow and divide it by the loan payment that you just calculated in question number 2 above. So in this case, our projected annual cash flow is $2,750,000. Our payment for this note is going to be $1,765,659. We divide those two numbers and it gives us a debt service coverage ratio of 1.56. So our question says, confirm the debt service coverage ratio required by the lender is met, and it is because we got an answer of 1.56, which is greater than the 1.5, which is the debt service coverage ratio that's listed in our information above. So we have completed the first 3 questions there. Number 4 on our list, okay, is a relatively simple one, okay? It's calculate the amount of equity required. Well, we know the total project cost is $30 million. So we subtract from that the loan amount that we calculated in question 1, the $18 million. And that means we have to raise $12 million in equity to make this project work. Pretty simple, but very important calculation. All right, now number 5, this is a little more complicated, maybe the hardest thing you'll have to complete all semester. All right, so here we have the formula for the weighted average cost of capital, which is the weight of debt times the cost of debt times the tax effect. And you then add that to the weight of the equity times the cost of the equity. Okay, so how do we do those calculations? Well, the weight of the debt is the percentage of money the bank is willing to loan us. So the debt to cost ratio above, which is 0.6, is our first number. Then we're going to do the cost of the debt, which is very important here. That's the bank loan amount. So we're going to do that as 7.5. Again, as we talked about earlier in the semester, I generally do that as a whole number because that we don't have to convert anything at the end. So that's 7.5. And then you multiply that by the tax effect, which is 1 minus the tax rate, which is 0.35, so that's 0.65. So you take 0.60, multiply it by 7.5 times 0.65, and that gives you the cost of the debt of 2.925. Then in order to complete this problem, then you have to complete and calculate the equity. So the equity is 0.40, 40%. How do we know that? Well, if the bank's going to loan us 60%, we're going to borrow 100% of the money. We know that's got to be 40%. So we multiply that by the investor's hurdle rate, the 15%. That's the only number that we have that will work in there. And that will give us 6% for the money for the equity will cost us on an annualized basis. We add the two of those together, and that gives us a weighted average cost of capital of 8.925. All right, so next, you slide down to the next page here. This will be posted for you in Blackboard to look at also, okay? So we're going to complete question 6 and question 7 here. Now, in order to do the net present value, we have to figure out what we estimate we can sell this project for at the end of year 10, right? The cap rate. So before you complete number 6 and 7, you need to use the cap rate to get the estimated selling price, which in this case is for year 10. And you do this by dividing the projected cash flow by the cap rate. So the only cash flow we have in this example is $2,750,000. We divide that by the cap rate, which is 0.10, and that means we're estimating based on our cash flow and other factors that in 10 years we will be able to sell this project for $27,500,000. Okay, so now we're going to calculate the net present value with that. How do we do that? We'll use the CF function on our calculator, and it's going to bring up first our CF0. We put in the total project cost. Do not get caught putting the 18 million here that we're going to borrow. This is the total project cost. Put that in as a negative number, and that is $30 million. So then we're going to put in year one cash flow is $2,750,000. Now, a little shortcut, when we scroll down on that, we get to the frequency of year one, and we could put 9. Why 9? Because we know we're going to have 9 years of cash flow. We're going to sell it in year 10, so we'll have 9 years of cash flow prior. So it's just a shortcut, speeds up the process of doing this calculation. So then we scroll down again, and we put in $30,250,000. Well, where does that come from? That is a combination of the selling price, the $27,500,000, and the cash flow for that year, the $2,750,000. So you add those two numbers together, and that gives you your cash flow for that year 10. We then scroll down. The frequency on that is also 1. We scroll down again now to CO3. At that point, we hit the compute net present value, and it brings up what interest rate do we want. So this is very important. We don't use the interest rate from the bank loan. We're going to use the interest rate that we just calculated above in the weighted average cost of capital. So that interest rate will be 8.925. And we hit the enter key. And after we do that, we scroll down one more time. That'll say net present value equals 0. Hit the compute key. And that will give us a negative $596,501. As we know, negative numbers are not good with net present value. So in this case, that would not be good. Then once we've completed that, all we have to do number 7, the internal rate of return, without resetting anything on the calculator, just hit the IRR button and compute, and that will give you 8.60%.